The air in New York's most exclusive restaurant, the Gilded Sparrow, was usually thick with the scent of truffle oil and quiet money. But tonight, it was poisoned with fear. At the center table sat Sterling Vance, a man whose net worth was larger than the GDP of a small country, and his voice was a weapon. He didn't just speak, he issued decrees laced with contempt. The staff scurried around him like frightened mice, their professional smiles strained and fragile. He had already sent back a $5,000 bottle of wine and reduced a junior waiter to tears. But he hadn't yet met Catherine Riley. She was new, unassuming, and watching his every move not with fear, but with the cold, calculating precision of a predator studying its prey. What he saw as a simple waitress was about to become the architect of his public undoing. The Gilded Sparrow was less a restaurant and more a sanctuary for the gods of finance and industry. Tucked away on a quiet, cobblestoned street in Soho, its entrance was unmarked, its existence a secret whispered among the city's elite. Inside the decor was a masterclass in understated opulence. Walls of dark mahogany booths upholstered in plush velvet, the color of midnight, and a single breathtaking crystal chandelier that cast a warm, dappled light, making everyone look richer, more important. The clinking of silverware on porcelain was a delicate symphony, the murmur of conversation, a polite, controlled hum. It was a world of absolute order, managed with military precision by its long-serving general manager, a perpetually anxious Frenchman named Jean-Pierre Dubois. Tonight, however, order had been dethroned by chaos. The chaos had a name: Sterling Vance. Vance was not merely wealthy. He was a force of nature, a corporate titan who devoured companies whole and left behind a trail of shattered careers and broken rivals. He was tall, impeccably dressed, in a custom Brioni suit, with silver hair swept back from a face that seemed carved from granite. His eyes, a piercing shade of Arctic blue, missed nothing and forgave less. He moved with an aura of absolute authority, as if the world were his boardroom and everyone in it was a subordinate to be managed or dismissed. He was seated at Table 1, the restaurant's prime real estate, a semicircular booth offering a panoramic view of the entire dining room. With him were two of his top executives, a nervous, balding man named Robert Finch and a sharp, immaculately dressed woman named Evelyn Reed. They sat ramrod straight, their faces masks of forced pleasantries, their gazes constantly flicking toward their boss, anticipating the next eruption. The first casualty of the evening was a young waiter named Leo. He was an aspiring actor, his youthful optimism not yet crushed by the city. When he approached the table to pour the water, his hand trembled slightly, causing a single drop to splash onto the pristine white tablecloth. It was an insignificant error, one that would have gone unnoticed by anyone else. Sterling Vance noticed. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He simply stopped talking mid-sentence and fixed Leo with his glacial stare. The entire table froze. The ambient hum of the restaurant seemed to fade into the background. "What is your name?" Vance asked. His voice was low, a controlled rumble that promised destruction. "Leo, sir," the young man stammered, his face paling. Leo Vance repeated, tasting the name with theatrical disdain. "Tell me, Leo, when you applied for a position at what is ostensibly one of this city's finest establishments, did you represent yourself as being competent? Or did you disclose a debilitating affliction that prevents you from completing a task as rudimentary as transferring water from a pitcher to a glass?" Evelyn Reed let out a choked, nervous laugh. Robert Finch stared intently at his bread plate. Leo's eyes darted towards Mr. Dubois, who was hovering helplessly nearby, his face a rictus of terror. I'm sorry, sir. It was an accident." "An accident," Vance mused, leaning back. Accidents are what happen when incompetence meets opportunity. This tablecloth is ruined. My concentration is broken. This entire experience is now tainted by your carelessness. Remove yourself from my sight. Send me someone who understands the concept of precision." Leo looked as if he'd been physically struck. He mumbled another apology and practically fled from the table, his face burning with humiliation. Mr. Dubois scurried forward, bowing and scraping, offering profuse apologies that Vance waved away with an impatient flick of his wrist. From her station near the service bar, Catherine Riley watched the entire exchange without a flicker of expression. She was new to the Gilded Sparrow, having been there only 3 months. To the rest of the staff, she was an enigma. She was in her late 30s with calm, intelligent grey eyes and an air of composure that seemed almost unnatural in the high-pressure environment. She did her job with a quiet, unobtrusive efficiency that had already earned Mr. Dubois' respect. She never gossiped, never complained, and never got flustered. While the other servers buzzed with panicked energy about Vance's arrival, Catherine polished her wine keys and ensured her station was perfectly aligned. She had served men like Vance before, though not in a restaurant. She knew the species well. The performative cruelty, the need to establish dominance in every interaction, the casual dehumanization of those they considered beneath them. It was a language of power she understood intimately. She watched him now not as a server watching a difficult customer, but as a strategist analyzing an opponent. She noted the way he controlled the conversation, the way his subordinates flinched when his tone sharpened, the way he scanned the room, cataloguing everything, asserting his ownership of the space. "He's a nightmare," whispered another waitress, Maria, as she refilled a water pitcher next to Catherine. "Dubois is going to have an aneurysm. He's already sent back the Chateau Margaux, said it was corked by mediocrity." Catherine simply nodded her eyes, still on table 1. Dubois shouldn't have put Leo on that table. "He's too green. No one is seasoned enough for Sterling Vance," Maria retorted. "He eats experience for breakfast. I heard last year he got a chef at a 3-star Michelin restaurant in Paris fired because his consommé was, and I quote, tepid and unambitious." Mr. Dubois was now approaching Catherine, his face slick with sweat. His usual French accent was more pronounced, a sure sign of extreme stress. "Catherine," he pleaded in a low, desperate voice, "I am so sorry to ask this. But Leo, he is unwell. He cannot go back out there. You are my best. You are calm. Could you please take over table 1? It wasn't a request. It was a Hail Mary. He was sending his most stable soldier into the heart of the battle. Catherine looked from Dubois' desperate face to the smouldering volcano at table 1. She felt no fear, only a strange, familiar sense of resignation. It seemed she could change her profession, but she could not escape the blast radius of men like Sterling Vance. "Of course, Mr. Dubois," she said, her voice even and steady. She picked up a fresh linen napkin and a polished water pitcher. "I'll handle it." As she walked towards the table, she felt the eyes of the entire staff on her. It was like walking into a lion's den, and everyone was waiting for the roar. She took a slow, calming breath, not to quell her own nerves, but to center her focus. Her face was a placid mask, revealing nothing of the intricate calculations happening behind her eyes. The storm was gathering, and she was walking calmly into its eye. Catherine approached the table with a fluid, deliberate grace that was the antithesis of Leo's nervous energy. She didn't rush, nor did she hesitate. Her movements were economical and precise. She reached Mr. Vance's side, and without a word used a crummer to silently sweep away the microscopic crumbs near his bread plate before refilling his water glass. The pour was perfect silent ending, exactly 3/4 of an inch from the rim with no drips. Vance, who had been in the middle of eviscerating a recent acquisition strategy with Robert Finch, stopped talking. The silence he commanded was absolute. He turned his head slowly, his Arctic blue eyes narrowing as they took in this new server. He had been expecting another trembling apology, another target for his scorn. Instead, he got quiet competence. It was an unexpected variable, and Sterling Vance did not like variables. "And who are you?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. "My name is Catherine. I'll be taking care of your table this evening," she replied, her voice pleasant but neutral. She did not offer a surname. She did not offer an apology for her predecessor. She simply stated a fact. "Catherine," he repeated, testing the sound of it. He looked her up and down, a dismissive appraisal designed to intimidate. He saw a woman in a standard black uniform, her light brown hair tied back in a simple, neat bun. She was plain, he thought, unremarkable, but there was something in her posture, a stillness that was vaguely irritating. She didn't cower. He decided to test her. The wine list he snapped without a please, or thank you. Catherine retrieved it instantly. He snatched it from her hand and began to peruse it. His lips curled in a permanent sneer. "The sommelier you employ is an idiot," he announced to the table, though the comment was meant for her. "His selections are pedestrian. He has a penchant for ostentatious New World wines that lack the subtlety and terroir of a proper Burgundy. Is he available? I'd like to tell him this to his face. Our sommelier, Mr. Alistair, is competing in the world's best sommelier finals in Copenhagen this week," Sir Catherine stated calmly, her expression unchanging. He was the North American champion. She delivered this information not as a defense, but as a simple, verifiable fact. A flicker of annoyance crossed Vance's face. His first volley had been effortlessly deflected by the truth. He tossed the wine list onto the table. "Fine. Bring me a bottle of the 1982 Pichon Longueville Comtesse de Lalande, and if it is even 1 degree above cellar temperature, I will have it poured on the floor." "An excellent choice," Sir Catherine said, with a slight nod before turning to Evelyn Reed. "Ma'am, may I get you something to begin?" Her ability to remain unruffled was clearly grating on him. He was a master of emotional manipulation, skilled at finding a person's weak point and pressing down until they broke. But Catherine offered him no weakness, no emotional handhold. Her professionalism was a smooth, impenetrable wall. Throughout the ordering process, Vance's contempt became a symphony. The amuse-bouche was an insult to the palate. The bread was aggressively mediocre. He subjected Robert Finch to a withering cross-examination about third-quarter profit margins, his voice rising just enough to turn the heads of the surrounding tables. "Do you understand, Robert, what happens when we miss projections by 2%? Vance demanded, leaning across the table. "It's not just a number on a spreadsheet. It's a signal of weakness to the street. It's blood in the water, and the sharks start circling. Are you a shark, Robert, or are you chum a shark, Sterling?" "Of course," Finch stammered, his face ashen, then start acting like one Vance hissed, before turning his attention back to the menu with a look of profound disgust. Catherine moved around the table like a ghost, her presence felt only when something was needed. She anticipated their needs before they were voiced. A dropped napkin was replaced before it could be remarked upon. A finished plate was cleared with silent efficiency. She orchestrated the service with the focus of a surgeon, her every action intended to de-escalate, to smooth over the jagged edges of Vance's personality. But Vance was not a man to be appeased. He thrived on conflict. Her flawless service was, in itself, a challenge to his authority. He needed a flaw, a crack in her composure that he could exploit. He found it, or so he thought, with the arrival of the main courses. Catherine and another server placed the plates before the 3 diners. Catherine herself served Mr. Vance his roasted duck. He stared at it for a long moment, his fork and knife untouched. Then he looked up at Catherine, a slow, malicious smile spreading across his lips. This was it. The moment he'd been waiting for. "This is wrong," he said, his voice deceptively soft. Mr. Dubois, who had been watching from a distance, began to walk towards the table, his face a mask of dread. "Is the dish not to your liking?" Sir Catherine asked, her tone still perfectly level. "It is not a question of liking," Vance said, picking up his fork and pointing it at the plate. "It is a question of competence. I specifically requested the duck with the cherry reduction sauce on the side, not drizzled over the top like some Jackson Pollock nightmare. Do you people listen, or are the words of your customers just an inconvenient noise you must endure between paychecks?" The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Evelyn and Robert stared at their plates, wishing the floor would swallow them whole. Other patrons were now openly staring, their quiet conversations faltering. The Gilded Sparrow had fallen silent, the entire room, an audience for Vance's performance. Catherine looked at the plate. Then she looked directly into Sterling Vance's eyes. Her own gaze was clear and steady. There was no apology in them. There was no fear. "I understand your concern, Mr. Vance," she said, her voice clear and calm, easily carrying in the silent room. "However, I have a perfect recollection of your order. You ordered the duck as prepared by the chef. You made no mention of requesting the sauce on the side. It was a direct contradiction. A simple waitress was publicly challenging the word of a billionaire. A collective gasp was almost audible in the room. Mr. Dubois froze mid-stride, his heart seizing in his chest. This was insubordination. This was career suicide. Vance's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. The affable mask of the corporate tyrant fell away, revealing the pure, unadulterated rage beneath. He had her. She had made a fatal error. She had called him a liar. "Are you calling me mistaken?" he snarled, leaning forward. His voice was no longer a rumble. It was the crack of a whip. "Are you a temporary server in an overpriced restaurant, suggesting that my memory is faulty? He was preparing for the kill. He would dismantle her piece by piece and ensure she never worked in this city again. He savored the moment, the absolute power he held over her life and livelihood." But Catherine didn't flinch. She simply held his gaze, her composure absolute. The wall was about to break, but not in the way he expected. The world of the Gilded Sparrow seemed to shrink, condensing into the charged space between the billionaire and the waitress. The air crackled with tension. Sterling Vance's face was a thundercloud of fury, his knuckles white where he gripped his fork. He was a king in his court, and this serf had dared to question his decree. He was about to unleash a tirade that would scorch the very varnish from the mahogany walls. "You have 5 seconds, he hissed, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper that was more terrifying than any shout, to apologize. Take this plate back to the kitchen and beg my forgiveness for your insolence. After that, I will personally speak to the owner of this establishment and see to it that you are not only fired, but blacklisted from every reputable restaurant in this hemisphere." The threat was not idle. Everyone in the room knew he had the power to do it. Mr. Dubois took a shaky step forward, his mouth opening to intervene, to sacrifice his employee to save his restaurant. But Catherine gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head in Dubois' direction, a silent command to stay put. Then she did something no one expected. She took a half-step closer to the table, leaning in slightly, not in a gesture of submission, but of confidentiality. Her voice, when she spoke, was so low that only the 3 people at the table could hear it clearly, forcing the straining ears of the other patrons to catch only a frustrating murmur. "Mr. Vance," she began, her tone soft and devoid of any emotion, "my memory is not what's in question here." Her eyes flickered down from his face for a fraction of a second, down to his left wrist, where a sliver of a platinum cufflink peeked out from his starched French cuff. It was an unusual design, not a gaudy monogram or a precious gem, but a small, crudely etched shape. It looked like a child's drawing of a lopsided star. Throughout the evening she had noticed his subconscious habit of touching it, his thumb stroking the etched surface whenever his anger began to rise, a tell he was completely unaware of. Her gaze returned to his, and her voice remained a quiet, devastatingly precise whisper. "That's a beautiful cufflink, a unique design." Vance was momentarily thrown off balance. This was not the conversation he was expecting. He glanced down at his wrist, confused. "What are you talking about?" "The etching." Catherine continued, her voice as smooth and sharp as obsidian. "Is it your daughter's drawing? I believe her name is Jessica. She must be about 10 years old now. She has her mother's lovely auburn hair, doesn't she?" The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. All the colour drained from Sterling Vance's face. His rage, so monumental just a moment before, seemed to vaporize, replaced by a profound, bone-deep shock. His jaw, which had been set in a hard, uncompromising line, went slack. His eyes, once so full of fire, were now wide with disbelief and a flicker of something else, fear. He hadn't spoken his daughter's name in a business setting in years. His ex-wife, Cassandra, had made sure of that. The divorce had been brutal and public, and he had lost. He had lost custody, lost visitation rights, and lost the one part of his life that wasn't a transaction. Cassandra and Jessica lived in London, now a world away, shielded from him by a wall of lawyers and a court order that cited his uncontrollable temper. The cufflinks, a Father's Day gift from years ago, were his only tangible connection to the child he was forbidden to see. It was his most private, painful secret, and this stranger, this waitress, had just laid it bare on the dinner table. Evelyn Reed and Robert Finch exchanged horrified, confused glances. They knew of the divorce, of course, but the subject of his daughter was a black hole of information, a topic so taboo that even mentioning it was grounds for immediate termination. Catherine wasn't finished. She pressed her advantage, her words delivered with the calm, methodical precision of a surgeon making a final, fatal incision. "It must be difficult," she murmured, her voice laced with a sliver of what could almost be mistaken for sympathy, though it was as cold as steel. "Maintaining this level of anger. It's a powerful tool for controlling a boardroom, but it's a shame when a man's pride costs him what he truly values. Some things once broken can't be bought back, no matter how many companies you acquire." She straightened up her face, once again a mask of professional neutrality. Now she said, her voice returning to a normal, polite volume, though it now carried an entirely new weight. "Would you like me to have the chef replate the duck, or is it acceptable as his checkmate?" Sterling Vance stared at her, his mind reeling. He felt exposed, dissected. She hadn't just shut him down, she had unraveled him. She had reached into his soul and pulled out his deepest regret, using it to neutralize him completely. His threats of blacklisting and firing her now seemed absurd, pathetic. How could he possibly punish her? She had just wielded a power over him that was far greater than his wealth. She had wielded his own truth. He couldn't speak. The words were stuck in his throat, choked by a sudden, overwhelming wave of shame and loss. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. His carefully constructed world of power and intimidation had been shattered by a few whispered sentences from a woman he had dismissed as a nobody. Finally, with a visible effort that seemed to cost him everything, he cleared his throat. He looked down at his plate, unable to meet her gaze. "It's fine," he rasped, the words barely audible. "It's fine as it is." Catherine simply nodded. "Very good, sir." She then turned to Robert Finch. "And for you, sir, is everything to your satisfaction?" Robert, looking at Catherine as if she had just tamed a dragon, could only nod dumbly, his eyes wide with awe and terror. Catherine continued her duties, moving to another table to pour wine, her movements as calm and unhurried as they had been all evening. The Gilded Sparrow remained silent for a few moments longer, the patrons and staff held in a state of suspended disbelief. They hadn't heard what she said, but they had seen its effect. They had witnessed David fell Goliath not with a stone, but with a word. The king had been silenced, his crown knocked askew, and the power in the room had irrevocably shifted. The aftermath of the confrontation was not loud, but deafeningly quiet. The charged energy that had radiated from Table 1 dissipated, replaced by a thick, awkward silence. Sterling Vance, a man who commanded every room he entered, now seemed to shrink into his seat. He picked up his fork and knife, but he didn't eat. He stared at the roasted duck on his plate as if it were an alien object, his mind clearly 1,000 miles away. The fire in his eyes had been extinguished, leaving behind cold grey ash. Evelyn Reed and Robert Finch were trapped in a state of professional paralysis. They didn't dare speak, didn't dare look at their boss, and certainly didn't dare look at the waitress who had just mentally disemboweled him. They cut their food into tiny, precise pieces, chewing mechanically without tasting a thing. The most powerful business dinner of their careers had devolved into the most uncomfortable meal of their lives. Mr. Dubois, who had witnessed the exchange from a safe distance, felt a dizzying mix of terror and awe. His first instinct was to rush over and fire Catherine on the spot to appease the wounded billionaire. But his second, more rational thought was that Vance hadn't demanded it. Vance, in fact, looked like a broken man. Firing Catherine now might somehow make things worse. He retreated to the relative safety of his office, poured a glass of water with a trembling hand, and wondered if his restaurant would survive the night. The true master of the situation was Catherine. Having delivered the verbal coup de grace, she simply melted back into the rhythm of the restaurant. She continued her rounds, checking on her other tables, offering dessert menus and refilling wine glasses. Her demeanor was unchanged, her smile was polite and distant, her movements efficient. To anyone who hadn't witnessed the confrontation, she was just another excellent server doing her job. But the staff knew. The whispers started almost immediately in the kitchen and at the service stations. What did she say to him? Maria hissed, her eyes wide, as she loaded a tray with clean glasses. His face just collapsed. "I don't know, but it was biblical," Leo whispered from the corner, where he was polishing silverware, having recovered from his earlier humiliation. She didn't even raise her voice. It was like she hypnotized him. The kitchen staff, who had been on red alert, tensed for the inevitable return of the duck, were now peering out through the pass-through window, watching the silent drama unfold. The head chef, a notoriously temperamental man named Antoine, even cracked a rare smile. The rest of the meal at Table 1 passed in near total silence. Vance pushed his food around his plate. He waved away the dessert menu with a limp hand. When Catherine approached to offer coffee, he flinched slightly, like a conditioned animal expecting a blow. "No," he said, his voice a hoarse croak. "Just the check." Catherine produced it promptly. Vance fumbled for his wallet, his usual decisive movements now clumsy and uncertain. He extracted a black Amex card, placing it in the leather billfold without looking at the total. The entire meal, the rejected wine, the uneaten food, the palpable tension had likely cost more than Leo's monthly rent. When Catherine returned with the slip for him to sign, he took the pen, but his hand hovered over the signature line. He looked up at her, and for the first time that evening, his eyes held no malice. They held a raw, unsettling confusion. He was looking at her not as a waitress, but as a puzzle he couldn't solve. Who was this woman? How could she have possibly known about Jessica? about the cufflinks. He was a man surrounded by the best security, the best private investigators, a man whose life was a fortress. Yet she had walked through his defenses as if they weren't there. He signed the bill, his signature, a barely legible scrawl. He stood up abruptly, the legs of his chair scraping harshly against the floor. "We're leaving," he announced to his shell-shocked associates. Evelyn and Robert scrambled to their feet, gathering their belongings. As they made their way to the exit, a strange thing happened. Usually Vance would stride through a restaurant like a conquering general, expecting the sea of patrons to part before him. Tonight his shoulders were slumped. His gaze was fixed on the floor. He seemed diminished, a ghost of the man who had entered hours earlier. As he passed the hostess stand, he paused. Mr. Dubois, seeing his chance, rushed forward. "Mr. Vance, I do hope the rest of your evening was satisfactory. I must apologize again for—" Vance held up a hand, cutting him off. He looked back across the dining room, his eyes finding Catherine as she cleared his table. Their gazes met for a brief electric moment across the crowded room. Catherine gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a nod of triumph or disrespect. It was a nod of finality, acknowledgement. Without another word, Sterling Vance turned and walked out into the New York night, leaving behind a stunned restaurant, 2 bewildered executives, and a legend in the making. Catherine picked up the signed bill. She glanced at the tip line. He had left nothing. A small, vindictive, final act of a defeated man. She felt a flicker of something, not disappointment, but grim satisfaction. It confirmed everything she knew about him. He couldn't help himself. Even in defeat, he had to land one last, petty blow. But as she took the billfold back to the service station, something fell out. It wasn't a folded $100 bill. It was a small platinum cufflink, the one with the lopsided star. He had left it behind, whether by accident or design she didn't know. She picked it up. It was heavy cold and felt strangely like a surrendered weapon. The story of the waitress who silenced Sterling Vance became an instant legend within the gilded cage of New York's service industry. It traveled through whispers from chefs to busboys, from sommelier to hosts, spreading from the Gilded Sparrow to every Michelin-starred restaurant in Manhattan. In a world where the customer was not just king, but a tyrannical deity, Catherine's quiet act of defiance was a revolutionary moment. She became a folk hero, a symbol of dignity for the thousands of service workers who had endured the casual cruelties of the ultra-wealthy. Back at the Gilded Sparrow, Catherine was treated with a new level of reverence. Mr. Dubois, after a sleepless night, expecting a wrathful call from Vance that never came, looked at her with a mixture of fear and profound respect. He gave her the best sections deferred to her judgment, and never again questioned her methods. Leo, the young waiter, followed her around like a disciple, convinced she possessed some kind of superpower. Catherine, for her part, ignored the myth-making. She came to work, did her job with the same quiet diligence, and went home to her small, book-filled apartment in the West Village. She placed the platinum cufflink in a small porcelain dish on her dresser and tried to forget about it. She hadn't sought the confrontation, but she hadn't shied away from it either. For years she had lived in a world of bullies like Vance, and she had promised herself she would never again stand by and allow someone to be dehumanized for sport. Meanwhile, Sterling Vance was not forgetting. The incident had burrowed deep under his skin, unsettling him in a way no corporate battle ever had. He wasn't just angry, he was profoundly disturbed. Her words echoed in his mind on a loop. A shame when a man's pride costs him what he truly values. He had spent 2 days in a fog of introspection, cancelling meetings and barking at assistants. He found himself staring at the one remaining cufflink on his dresser, the empty space beside it, a glaring symbol of his loss. How did she know about Jessica? The question consumed him. It was impossible. He had scrubbed his daughter from his public life with ruthless efficiency after the divorce. The press had been muzzled by non-disclosure agreements, so ironclad they could withstand a nuclear blast. His own staff was terrified to even think her name. On the third day, he did what he always did. When faced with a problem he couldn't solve, he threw money at it. He summoned Arthur Kendrick, his head of security, and a former MI6 agent whose loyalty was absolute and whose methods were discreet. "I want to know who she is," Vance said, his voice flat and devoid of its usual bluster. He sat in his penthouse office overlooking Central Park, the city lights glittering below like a conquered kingdom. "The waitress at the Gilded Sparrow. Her name is Catherine." Kendrick, a tall, gaunt man with watchful eyes, simply nodded. Everything. Vance confirmed. Where she was born, what she ate for breakfast, where she went to school, every job she's ever had. "I want to know how she knew. I want her file on my desk by Friday." Kendrick was brutally efficient. He didn't need a surname. A first name, a place of employment, and a rough description were more than enough. He tapped into databases, ran facial recognition against city surveillance, and made a few quiet calls to contacts who owed him favors. For 2 days he built a profile, and when he presented the file to Sterling Vance on Friday morning, even the unflappable Kendrick seemed intrigued. Vance opened the slim manila folder. The first page was a standard background check. Catherine Riley, age 38, born in Boston. No criminal record. A series of mundane service jobs over the past year. He flipped the page, and then he froze. The page was dominated by a photograph. It was a professional headshot of a younger Catherine, her hair cut in a severe but stylish bob, her eyes sharp and focused. She was wearing a tailored blazer, the picture of corporate power. Beneath it was a name and a title that made the air leave Vance's lungs. Catherine Kate, Riley-esque, senior litigator, formerly of Sullivan and Cromwell LLP, specialty hostile corporate defense. Vance's mind raced, connecting the dots with sickening speed. Sullivan and Cromwell, one of the most powerful feared law firms on the planet. They were the legal assassins you hired when you wanted to bury someone. He knew them well. He'd hired them himself. And he knew the legends about some of their lawyers. He snatched his phone and called his own chief legal counsel, a man who had been in the corporate law game for 40 years. Henry Vance barked. The name Catherine Riley, from Sullivan and Cromwell. Mean anything to you? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then a low whistle. "Sterling, you must be joking. Kate Riley wasn't just a lawyer. She was a ghost story they told junior associates to scare them straight. They called her the archivist because she had a photographic memory for detail. She could recall footnote 37B from a deposition 5 years prior. She was famous for her quiet, brutal cross-examinations. She wouldn't shout. She'd just ask one perfectly aimed question that would make a C-suite executive confess to things his own mother didn't know. A complete prodigy. Then about a year ago, she just vanished. Walked out, resigned, fell off the face of the earth. Rumor was she burned out. Said she was tired of defending monsters. Vance hung up the phone, the receiver clattering into the cradle. He stared at the photograph in the file. It all made sense now. The unnerving calm, the analytical gaze. The way she had observed him, not as a customer, but as a hostile witness. She hadn't been guessing about his daughter. In her line of work, a man like Sterling Vance would have been a case study. His brutal divorce would have been required reading a textbook example of high net worth litigation. The details about Cassandra and Jessica, the court, orders, his temper, it would have all been in the public record, buried in thousands of pages of legal documents that only a specialist, an archivist, would ever read and remember. The cufflink. That was the masterstroke. She must have seen it accessed that vast archive in her mind, connected the child's drawing to the case file on his divorce, and deployed the information with surgical precision. He wasn't undone by a waitress. He was dismantled by one of the sharpest legal minds of her generation, a woman who had willingly traded a 7-figure salary and a corner office for an apron and a serving tray. The knowledge didn't make him angry. It terrified him. If she had done this to him, a man she was merely serving dinner, what was she capable of if she actually considered him an enemy? For the first time in his adult life, Sterling Vance felt a genuine chilling sense of fear. He also felt something else, something he hadn't experienced in a very long time. Respect. A week later, the reservation book at the Gilded Sparrow showed a familiar, dreaded name: Vance Party of One. The news sent a ripple of panic through the staff. Mr. Dubois immediately broke into a cold sweat. Was he coming back for revenge, to finish the job and have Catherine fired publicly? The entire restaurant was on edge. When Vance walked in, however, he was a different man. The swagger was gone. The aura of oppressive authority had been replaced by a quiet, intense sobriety. He was still impeccably dressed, but his movements were more deliberate, less aggressive. He greeted the hostess politely, and when Mr. Dubois rushed over, he simply said, "Good evening, Jean-Pierre. I trust my table is ready." "Of course, Mr. Vance. Right this way." Dubois led him not to table 1, but to a more discreet, smaller table in a quiet corner. As Vance sat, he scanned the dining room. His eyes found Catherine, who was in the middle of explaining the specials to a table of tourists. "One more thing," Jean-Pierre Vance said, his voice low. "I would like Miss Riley to be my server this evening." Dubois' heart hammered against his ribs. This was it, the public execution. "Sir, of course, but if there was any dissatisfaction from your last visit, I assure you, my last visit was—" "Illuminating," Vance cut him off. "Please just send her over." When Catherine was informed, she showed no reaction. She finished with her current table, and then, with the same unhurried calm as before, she approached Vance's table. "Good evening, Mr. Vance," she said, placing a menu in front of him. "Welcome back." He watched her for a long moment, his arctic blue eyes searching her face for any sign of triumph or fear. He found none. Only a placid, professional mask. "Ms. Riley," he said the name, sounding formal and strange. Or should I say, Councillor Catherine's composure didn't waver, but there was a subtle shift in her eyes, a spark of acknowledgement. The game was afoot. "I go by Catherine now," she replied smoothly. "May I get you something to drink while you look at the menu?" "Whiskey." "Macallan 25. "Neat," he ordered. He didn't look at the menu. "I'm not here for the food." She nodded and walked away to place the order. When she returned with the expensive scotch, he gestured to the empty chair opposite him. "Please, sit. I'm working Mr. Vance. I'm sure Jean-Pierre will allow it. I am, after all, a valued customer." He said, a hint of his old irony creeping back into his voice. "Consider it part of the service." With a glance at Mr. Dubois, who gave a frantic, jerky nod of permission, Catherine sat. She sat with the straight-backed posture of a lawyer at a negotiation table, not a waitress taking a break. For a moment, they just sat in silence, two formidable opponents sizing each other up. "The file on my desk was quite thorough," Vance began. "Sullivan and Cromwell, top of your class at Harvard Law." The archivist. "You gave it all up to do this." The question I can't answer is why Catherine looked around the bustling, elegant dining room. In your world, Mr. Vance, everything is a transaction, a zero-sum game. You acquire, you win, you dominate. You spend your life collecting things, companies, properties, power. After a decade in that world, defending men like you, I realized all I was acquiring was a deep, soul-level exhaustion. I was helping to break things, people regulations, spirits. I wanted to be in a place where the goal was to create a small, perfect moment of pleasure for someone, to serve a beautiful plate of food, to recommend the perfect wine. It's an honest, tangible good in the world. It's quiet, and I am no longer required to defend the indefensible. Her explanation was simple, direct, and utterly incomprehensible to him. But the money, the power, the status, you just walked away. Some people define wealth by what they can buy, she said, her grey eyes meeting his. I've learned to define it by what I no longer need to sell. My time, my principles, my peace of mind. He took a long sip of his whiskey, the gears turning in his head. He was trying to process her worldview, but it was like trying to read a foreign language. I know how you knew about my family. He said the words, tasting like rust in his mouth. The court records. You read them. It was part of a case study my firm compiled on asset division in high-conflict divorces. Your case was a landmark, required reading for anyone in the field. She stated it as a matter of fact, not an apology. And you held on to that information all these years, and used it to humiliate me over a plate of duck. No, she corrected him gently. You used your power to humiliate a young man named Leo over a drop of water. You tried to use it to humiliate me over a sauce I knew for a fact you never ordered. I didn't use information to humiliate you, Mr. Vance. I used the truth to remind you that your behavior has a cost. A cost you know better than anyone. The directness of her statement struck him silent again. No one had spoken to him with such unvarnished honesty in 30 years. He leaned forward, changing tactics. Come work for me. He said the offer coming out as a command. In-house counsel. Name your price. Double what you were making at Sullivan. Triple. I need someone like you. Someone who isn't afraid of me. It was his ultimate move. The transactional solution. He couldn't beat her, so he would buy her. Catherine almost smiled. It was a faint, sad expression. Mr. Vance, you've been listening, but you haven't heard a word I've said. I didn't leave that life because the salary was too low. I left because the price was too high. I appreciate the offer, but my answer is no. His last gambit had failed. He was out of moves. He sat back, defeated again. But this time the defeat felt different. It wasn't a loss. It was a lesson. He finished his whiskey in silence, the expensive liquid doing nothing to calm the turmoil inside him. He was looking at a woman who possessed a form of power he couldn't comprehend, a freedom he could never afford. Thank you for your time, Catherine, he said, finally. He stood up, placed $100 bill on the table for the drink, and walked towards the exit. At the door he paused and looked back at her. You were right, he said, his voice just loud enough for her to hear. It wasn't worth the price. Then he was gone. Catherine didn't see Sterling Vance again. A few weeks after their second final encounter, a story appeared in the financial section of the Wall Street Journal. It was a small piece, easily missed, announcing that Sterling Vance was taking an extended sabbatical from his position as CEO of Vance Global Enterprises. The official reason cited was exhaustion. The unofficial rumors which Catherine heard from a table of gossiping hedge fund managers were that he had moved to London to try and reconnect with his ex-wife and petition the courts for a chance to see his daughter. The night after the article appeared, as Catherine was closing out her shift, Mr. Dubois asked her to come to his office. A woman was sitting in the chair opposite his desk. She was elegant in her early 60s, with kind eyes and a warm smile. Catherine Dubois said nervously, I would like you to meet the owner of the Gilded Sparrow. My wife, Genevieve Dubois. Catherine was surprised. In her months at the restaurant, the owner had been a mysterious, unseen figure. Genevieve stood and extended her hand. Her grip was firm. "It is a pleasure to finally meet you properly, Catherine." Genevieve said her English tinged with a faint, melodic French accent. "I apologize for the subterfuge." Catherine was confused. "Subterfuge," Genevieve smiled. "I knew who you were before my husband hired you. I have a friend who was a partner at your old law firm. She told me about your resignation, about your search for a quieter life. When you applied here, I told Jean-Pierre to hire you immediately." Jean-Pierre looked sheepish. "She never told me why. Just that you were the best candidate. I have owned this restaurant for 30 years. Genevieve continued her expression, turning serious. "I have seen the best and worst of humanity walk through my doors. I have seen men like Sterling Vance treat my staff like dirt on their shoes for far too long. I hired you, Catherine, hoping that your unique strength, your composure, might bring a different kind of balance to this place. I never could have predicted what would happen, but I am not surprised by it. You did more than serve a meal. You served a consequence, and for that, I am profoundly grateful." She opened a drawer in her husband's desk and pulled out a small velvet box. She handed it to Catherine. "This was left for you. It arrived by courier this morning." Catherine opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was the platinum cufflink with the lopsided star. Next to it was its matching pair, and beneath them was a small cream-colored card folded in half. She opened it. The handwriting was a sharp, decisive scrawl, a reminder of the true bottom line. "Thank you." It was unsigned. Tucked into the fold of the card was a check. It was a personal check drawn from the private account of Sterling Vance. It was made out to Leo Martinez. She now knew Leo's last name. The young waiter Vance had humiliated. The amount was for $250,000. In the memo line were 2 words, "For your art." Catherine stared at the check, then at the cufflinks, a slow, genuine smile finally gracing her lips. It wasn't a victory over Sterling Vance. It was something more profound. It was the faint, hopeful glimmer of a man beginning to buy back his own soul. She finished her shift, untied her apron, and walked out into the cool city night. The streets of Soho were quiet now, the cobblestones gleaming under the streetlights. She felt a sense of peace that had nothing to do with money or power, and everything to do with the quiet, unshakable knowledge that true wealth wasn't about what you owned, but about what you had the integrity to protect in yourself and in others. And in that moment, walking home to her small apartment, filled with books, Catherine Riley felt like the richest woman in New York. The story of Sterling Vance and Catherine Riley isn't just about a billionaire getting his comeuppance. It's a powerful reminder that true strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers a devastating truth. It shows that dignity and integrity are weapons that no amount of money can buy, and no amount of power can defeat. In a world that often celebrates the loudest voice in the room, we see that real change, real impact, can come from the quietest corner, from an unexpected person who simply refuses to be broken. It's a testament to the fact that everyone, no matter their station in life, has the power to hold others accountable and to stand firm in their own worth. If this story of quiet courage and profound transformation resonated with you, please take a moment to hit that like button and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications for more real-life stories that challenge our perspectives and inspire us to find the strength within ourselves. Thank you for listening.